You are about to take a tablet. You put it in your mouth, swallow it down with water, and trust completely that whoever made it knew what they were doing. That trust is so deep, you don't even think about it. You just take the pill. Now, go back 500 years. You walk into a pharmacy. A man in an apron hands you a small glass bottle. Inside is a fine dark powder, and it will cost you roughly a week's wages. You ask what's in it. He tells you. And here is where the story changes forever. The ingredient is a person, ground up, powdered, put in a bottle, and sold to you as medicine, with a doctor's recommendation. This was not fringe. This was not a dark ritual. This was the mainstream medicine of Europe for over 500 years. Sold in pharmacies, prescribed by royal physicians, consumed by kings and priests and scientists who all believed that eating a dead human being was the most rational thing you could do for your health. And the last recorded attempt to use corpse medicine in Germany happened in 1908. That is 3 years after Einstein published the theory of special relativity. This is the story of corpse medicine. Let's start at the beginning, not the weird beginning, the logical beginning. Because this practice did not start with madmen, it started with a single word. In ancient Persia, there was a black tar-like substance that seeped out of mountain rock. They called it mumia, from the Persian word for wax. Mumia spread through the Arabic world as a prized, expensive, effective drug. And then, somewhere around the 11th century, a translation error changed everything. European scholars confused this Persian word, mumia, with the dark resinous coating found on preserved Egyptian mummies. Two things, both dark and sticky, got their names tangled. And suddenly, European physicians believed that Egyptian mummies contained the same miraculous healing substance they'd been reading about in Arabic medical texts. The result was one of the most extraordinary medical crazes in human history. By the 12th century, European apothecaries were grinding up Egyptian mummies and stocking the powder on their shelves. The demand was immediate. The supply was limited. And so, what happened next was completely predictable. Tomb raiding became a pharmaceutical business. Egyptian tombs were broken into, not for gold or jewelry, but for bodies. Real ancient mummies were stripped, crumbled, ground into powder, mixed with wine or chocolate or honey, and swallowed. A two-fisted handful of the powder could apparently treat epilepsy, vertigo, and palsy. Mixed with turpentine and wine, it protected against plague. It cured headaches, stomach ulcers, bruising, and internal bleeding. The French king, Francis I, who ruled in the 1500s, carried a personal supply of mummy powder on his person at all times. Not in a cabinet back at the palace, on his body, in his pocket. Francis Bacon, one of the founding figures of the scientific method, publicly endorsed mummy powder for staunching blood. One book from 1663 listed the properties with the same matter-of-fact confidence a modern doctor would use to explain ibuprofen. Quote, mummy dissolves coagulated blood, relieves cough and pain in the spleen, and is very beneficial in flatulency and delayed menstruation. Your apothecary stocked it, your doctor prescribed it, your king kept it in his pocket. But demand quickly outpaced what Egyptian tombs could supply. And so, the trade adapted the way all trades adapt when supply runs out. It started faking. Body snatchers across Europe began stealing fresh corpses, packing them in salt, drying them in ovens, and grinding them into a powder that looked, tasted, and smelled close enough to the real thing that buyers could not tell the difference. Now, here is where it gets darker still, because mummy powder was only the beginning. European physicians believed in one core idea that drove every form of corpse medicine. The body contains a vital life force, and if you transfer that life force into a sick person, they heal. This is the engine. And it meant that fresh was better than old. A body that had just died violently in the peak of health still held its full force. A 2,000-year-old mummy, however finely powdered, was already weakened, and so the medicine evolved. Like cures like, vital force transfers between bodies. Fresh is more potent than old. A violent death preserves maximum force. Every step followed from the last. The logic was coherent. The evidence was what they had. In ancient Rome, the blood of gladiators was already being sold at arena concession stands while it was still warm. Written records from 40 AD confirm it. Physicians recommended that epileptics drink blood, quote, hot from the cut throat of a gladiator. Healthy, strong, brave men killed violently. Their blood, fresh and full of force, sold to the crowd the moment the fight was over. When gladiatorial combat was banned around 400 AD, the practice simply transferred. An executed criminal became the gladiator's medical replacement. Fresh blood from a healthy person who had just died a violent death. For the next 1500 years, crowds gathered at public executions across Germany, Sweden, Denmark, and Norway, holding up cups to catch blood from the scaffold the moment it fell. A single Franciscan apothecary in 1679 published an actual recipe for blood jam, made from fresh human blood, reduced to a spreadable concentrate. The last recorded attempt to gather blood from an execution for medical purposes was made by a woman in Freiburg, Germany, who approached the authorities at a scaffold in 1908. Not the Middle Ages, 1908, the same year the first Ford Model T rolled off the production line. To gather blood for a young relative who suffered from epilepsy, she was turned away. And then there was the skull. Powdered human skull was prescribed specifically for headaches because of a principle physicians called cures, like treating a sick head with part of a head. But the skull also had to come from someone who had died violently. An elderly person's skull might contain, in the medical thinking of the time, some of the very illness the medicine was meant to cure. You wanted youth. You wanted force. You wanted violent death. King Charles II of England, who was himself an enthusiastic amateur chemist and kept a private laboratory at Whitehall Palace, purchased the formula for a skull-based tincture from his own doctor, Jonathan Goddard, for £6,000. The recipe was intricate: 5 pounds of powdered human skull, combined with dried vipers, hartshorn, ivory, and multiple distillations of alcohol. Charles sipped this mixture regularly while working in his laboratory. He mixed variants of it himself. When he suffered a seizure in 1685, his doctors poured 40 drops of this elixir down his throat per day. It did not save him. He died 5 days later. His skull tincture lived on without him. It was sold in London shops throughout the entire 18th century. His doctor sourced the skulls from Irish gravediggers, who were paid on the side to supply them. Across the channel, a brain scientist named Thomas Willis, one of the founders of modern neurology, the man who named the nervous system, brewed a drink for brain bleeding that combined powdered human skull with hot chocolate. Not one fringe quack. The man who named the nervous system, drinking skull and chocolate. Queen Mary II of England received the same skull drops on her deathbed in 1695. Prescribed for pain relief. Medical books across Europe published skull-based recipes as standard treatment. A German alchemist's epilepsy cure from 1643 called for 3 skulls from men killed by violent means. One physician treated epileptics with skull moss. A specific green moss that grew over buried skulls was harvested, dried, and powdered. Your physician might prescribe skull moss powder for nosebleeds. You would pack a pinch directly into your nostrils. Now, if drinking skull sounds too extreme, here is the alternative your physician might have recommended instead. A salve made from human fat, rubbed directly onto your joints. European executioners in the Netherlands and Munich job that their position made uniquely easy. They were also the local medical supplier. They tightened the noose, and then, the following day, they rendered the fat from the body, mixed it with animal fat, and sold the resulting ointment to the same physicians. It was called poor sinner's fat, and it was used across Europe to treat gout, arthritis, joint pain, muscle cramps, and nerve damage. German physicians wrapped fat-soaked bandages around wounds. The recipe often mixed the human fat with animal fat, blood, marrow, and beer. In 1601, after a major military battle at Ostend in Belgium, after the fighting stopped and harvested bags of fat from the fallen soldiers, Dutch surgeons walked onto the battlefield, intending to use it in the treatment of wounded survivors. By the late 19th century, human fat had been refined, sterilized, and marketed under the clinical trade name Humanol, sold in neat glass vials, injected into patients at medical offices in Germany as a treatment for surgical scars and wound disinfection. The vials were still in circulation in the 1920s. And just in case you thought the mummy trade was only about medicine, painters prized a pigment made from ground mummy called mummy brown, a deep, rich brown, perfect for shadows and flesh tones, stocked in art supply shops in London as late as the 1960s. When the pre-Raphaelite painter Edward Burne-Jones discovered what was in his favorite paint tube, he reportedly held a funeral for it in his garden. The last listing of powdered mummy in a German medical catalog appeared in 1924. The year after, 1925, the first issue of The New Yorker was published. Ernest Hemingway published The Sun Also Rises the following year. This is not the ancient world. The ancient world was still on the shelf. So why did it stop? Not because someone proved it didn't work. Not because a controlled trial came back negative. It stopped because fashions changed. Because the Industrial Revolution reframed the body as a machine rather than a vessel of vital force. Because the germ theory of disease gave physicians a different explanatory framework. Because grave robbing became a criminal offense with real enforcement. Because, slowly, the cultural story around dead bodies shifted from resource to remains. The science didn't change the practice. The culture did. The last vial of injectable humanol, human fat, sterilized and bottled, went out of use in Germany in the 1920s. Not because it was banned, because it stopped working well enough, and other options existed. And in 1924, for the last time, a pharmacist somewhere in Germany wrote mumia, powdered mummy, in a supply catalog, and nobody ordered enough to bother restocking. And here's the part that is genuinely hard to sit with. These were not stupid people. They were not malicious. King Charles II was an intelligent, scientifically curious man who ran a private chemistry laboratory for fun. Thomas Willis built the foundations of modern neurology. Francis Bacon helped invent the scientific method. These people operated from the most rigorous framework available to them. And inside that framework, corpse medicine was completely rational. Like cures like. Vital force transfers between bodies. Fresh is more potent than old. A violent death preserves maximum force. Every step followed from the last. The logic was coherent. The evidence was what they had, and they acted on it the same way you act when your doctor tells you to take the pill in your hand. Complete, sincere, well-reasoned trust in the best knowledge available. Go back to that tablet in your hand. Think about what a doctor in 1685 would think if they saw it. A small white disc made in a factory, with no apparent connection to any living thing, intended to alter the chemistry of your blood. They would find it baffling, possibly dangerous, probably less convincing than what they already knew. In 500 years, someone might feel exactly the same way about what we're swallowing right now. This is not a story about how primitive people used to be. This is a story about how completely a culture can be convinced that something is obvious, correct, and rational, right up until the moment it isn't. The doctors were real, the pharmacies were real, the prescriptions were real. The king really did sip powdered skull and alcohol at his desk every morning. And if you had lived then, surrounded by the same evidence and the same educated consensus, and the same trust in the people who told you what to swallow, you would have taken the pill too. Go back to that tablet in your hand one more time. Every generation trusts what its best minds tell it to swallow. We are not different. We are not smarter. We are just later. If this is the kind of history that actually surprises you, that's the point of this channel. The true stories that never made it into your textbooks, hiding just underneath the version of history you think you already know. Subscribe and drop a comment telling me which ingredient shocked you the most, because I read every single one of them.